And we're on. Welcome to Abstractable. My name's Locke, and with me is Ryan, who's all the way over the other side of the world in France. And, well, what's this podcast about? Well, the Abstractable Podcast, I reckon, is about getting better at whatever you want to get better at by learning from other people and books and interesting stuff. So today we were talking about a book that we've both really enjoyed reading, and it's called The Creative Curve by Allen Gannett.
And we certainly dive into the rabbit hole today, Lockie. We talk about what the creative curve is and how to harness its power, or harness the power of the bell, as we refer to. We talk about the 4 laws of creativity as Allen sees them, and some of the big misconceptions and myths that are associated with creativity. We dive into the lives of Mozart, Paul McCartney, Giro, and many other creative geniuses. And why? Because we want to better understand what the hell goes on inside these people's minds. And we also want to delve into how we can also access this creative genius that lurks inside them. So you can find out more about Allen on Twitter @Allen, or at his website, allen.xyz. Don't forget, you can check out full video from all of our episodes on YouTube, or check out our show notes, including any of the books that we mentioned throughout every episode, on our Instagram page link, at The Abstractable. We hope you enjoy the episode. And we are back. That wasn't very good. But we're keeping it.
We're keeping it. There it is. That's the start of most episodes. How you doing?
I am doing well. I was going to see if I could see who's going to fall first. It was almost like a Mexican standoff there, mate.
I gave you a long pause just to see what you were going to do, and you've given the answer I was hoping for, that it's staying in.
Pulled the trigger. We're in the mix. There's no redoing that.
I've done enough of those. It's about time you did one. So,
yeah, but
what are we talking about today?
How do you know mine wasn't intentional, mate? I might have just been setting you up.
I saw it in your eyes.
You saw
the panic.
So, The Creative Curve.
Yeah, this book's really cool. I read it quite a long time ago now, but it was nice revisiting it to do this episode.
Yeah, I was in the same bracket, mate. And it was super nice coming back to it. Just there's quite a bit of meat in it, and you would, I don't want to say you'd be surprised, but Allen Gannett, who wrote the book, is quite young, and so we don't normally associate, a 20, whatever it is, 28-year-old writing a pretty incredible book, and I feel like that's what he's done.
Yeah, it's awesome, and I reckon just very easy to digest too. It's set out in a way that you can really kind of understand the concepts without too much fluff, which is nice.
Yeah. So maybe a little bit more on Allen, hooking straight into it, mate. He was born in 1991, which makes him definitely the youngest showcase person, I think, on our entire episode series so far.
Scary.
He's lowered the average age of our showcasing, people that get showcased.
We don't discriminate though.
No. Age is no
book's a good book.
That's exactly right. So he lives in Washington, D.C., and he studied at George Washington University and studied political science. At 19 years old, which is 2010, mind you, so not that long ago, he founded Splash Networks, and this was basically bringing some social concepts to higher education, like social networking concepts to higher education.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is quite interesting, right? Because normally we do tell a little bit about their story. And pretty soon, I'm already at 19 years of age. I'm going to reach 20, 29, 30 years of age, which is, I think he's about 29 now, pretty quick. So 2011, he was a CMO at Employee Insight, and he got $1 million in funding as part of that business. And then shortly after, it was acquired by Get It in 2014. So already making a pretty big name for himself at the age of 20. And I don't know what his payout and package was as a result of that acquisition, but I don't imagine it was too small given the funding he'd already had. 2011, he became co-founder of what's known as Accelerprise Ventures, which is an early stage enterprise software company and venture capital company. And so they were very much focused on finding those, as I said, the early stage in enterprise software companies to invest some money into. And many of the companies within their portfolio actually became acquired by big tech later on. I know they had like a Microsoft acquisition in there and a few other things.
Cool.
So within the actual portfolio of Accelerprise was TrackMaven. Now, TrackMaven was a company that he started at the age of 22. And
love starting a company.
He loves to start a company. And it seems he does it pretty well.
Yeah.
Even by the age of 22. But what's so fascinating is this entire time, and when he was building, TrackMaven into its maturity, and I think a few people might actually be familiar with TrackMaven, he had imposter syndrome the entire time. And he said it was something that he really struggled with. And then he just needed to, well, in his case, he was able to reflect back on the fact that he had made essentially 2 successful exits prior to this, or had run 2 relatively successful companies prior to this, was already in his 3rd, and then this was kind of him going into the 4th. So it's quite I don't want to say quite nice to hear, but it's it's good to hear that it's something that people suffer from regardless of where they are along the kind of track.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to hear that these people are human too. What do you think about like the culture of exiting startups and that terminology?
Yeah, I've heard of yeah. Okay, here we go. I'm just trying to recall where I heard it. So I've recently watched some webinars. It's Giants webinars run by a company called Blackbird VC. Really good. They're running, and they're actually running a podcast now. And so one of their webinars was literally of the title, "Start a company to stay at a company," or something like that, or "Start to not exit." And I thought that was really, really well done, because I think a lot of people go into the whole premise behind the webinar was that too many people now just simply go into building a company just to sell it, particularly in the startup space. It's kind of like get in there, move fast, break a lot of things as you go, and then give it a handball off into your own mental trash pile and sell it to someone, and then go on to the next thing.
It kind of feels like that. Yeah, it's very transactional. It's not really building a company for the sake of the meaning of what that business is for or what it stands for, really. It's like building it for cash and to cash out.
Do you think that because like the classic throwaway is, the founders of, any startup are just so passionate about what they do. But I can't help but feel that the ones that are going for these quick exits, you can't be passionate about doing whatever it is that you're doing. Because clearly...
Yeah, you're more passionate about. Yeah, that's right. You can't be that passionate about it if you've sold it at the first port of you can and sort of dropped it,
Yeah. And I think
I'm not saying you have to try and save the world, but I think a lot of companies in the tech space kind of bill themselves as trying to make the world a better place, but they're trying to sell or get to a public offering and get the hell out.
Yeah, I think from a certainly Allen's perspective, in this book, I feel like that age, certainly from the the later teen years to the mid even to late 20s is a real kind of rite of passage, mate. A real formation period in trying to work out what the hell you're doing, and you're chopping and changing things all the time. So I can definitely empathize with that. And
yeah, it's certainly not a reflection on him. I mean, it's more just that whole scene sometimes feels a bit shallow to me. To be finding yourself by creating many multi-million-dollar companies is a pretty good effort.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of the cases of, in order to create more leverage for yourself, it helps to have backing of the money from an exit. So for example, we've just seen Elon Musk and SpaceX put the first commercial space flight basically into space and passengers. Now he has said that he wouldn't have been able to do that if he hadn't have had the exit from PayPal. So we probably need to tread carefully.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, he went into, because clearly it sounds like he did exiting companies and things. So he went into this venture capital firm, or starting his own venture capital firm, which meant he had quite a bit of exposure to to the transactional nature of that. So as I mentioned, TrackMaven was one of the companies in that portfolio, which he started at the age of 22. And he, as the CEO and co-founder, he was, really leading the charge on that. And it seems that he shifted his focus further and further away from Accelerprise more into TrackMaven. So TrackMaven, for people that aren't familiar with it, it's a marketing analytics and recommendations software used essentially by marketing teams. So some of his clients include Microsoft, Saks Fifth Avenue, General Electric, the NBA, Home Depot, Honda, et cetera, et cetera.
Big names.
He's got a big belt of bold clients in that offering. So he certainly, I think he's broken past the imposter, just slightly.
Oh yeah.
And that company is actually merged now with Skyward, and he's the chief strategy officer now in that company. And they're more focused a little bit more around the creating authentic stories for brands. So they've kind of leveled everything up, by the sounds, to another level in the marketing space. So at age 24, he was then selected. Bear in mind, he's still at the age of, very, very young. At the age of 24, he was selected on 30 under 30 list for Forbes and for Inc. magazine. There's some pretty good accolades. And he's also on the World Economic Forum as a Global Shaper Fellow. And then 2018 rolls around and he releases his first book, The Creative Curve, which is...
spare time, just knocked out a non-fiction book. Not bad.
Yeah, and the research behind it too. He's done well.
Yeah.
And just again with all that extra spare time on the end, he's also a regular writer and contributor to fastcompany.com. And so he has a few quite good articles actually up on Fast Company. And still lives in Washington, DC, and that pretty much brings us to the end of his history because he's only 29 years old.
Yeah. Watch this space.
Yeah, I think there's plenty. I think there's plenty more to come from him.
Yeah. And the book.
Yeah. So what? Maybe Lockie, you could tell us a little bit about what the book is about.
So the book is called The Creative Curve, and it basically is about the process of creativity, and essentially it's his goal to demystify it in this book. And so he kind of delves into a number of creative, what are known as creative geniuses, and kind of, I guess, looks at how they went about creating their great works. But not just like maybe artists. He goes right through writers and also business people and anyone who he considers kind of creative. And so essentially he talks about the concept of the creative curve, which is our first discussion point, and then talks about the laws of creativity, as he calls them, and there's 4 laws. And the book's kind of wrapped around those concepts.
Yeah. And as I said, there was quite a bit of research that went into it. And I think there was 25 living, what he considered creative geniuses within their own domains interviewed as part of the book, which includes, New York Times best-selling authors, rock stars, the likes of, say, Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm Gladwell, funnily enough, was the guy that kind of popularized the 10,000-hour rule word, which we're actually going to talk about a little bit later on. Dave Rubenstein, which is like he's a billionaire, which is quite a big thing. It was interesting
hearing about him. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he had some US congressmen, he had news anchors, he had the composers of La La Land, the musical, for anyone that's familiar, the Reddit founder, producer of Hunger Games, and many others. He had just this weirdly kind of wide and varied crew, if you will. And then obviously he delved into the history books, and in particular like Mozart and the Beatles, and a few others, but he really did focus on those two from what I took away.
Yeah, which is I think Gladwell touches on the Beatles in some of his books too. So some interesting parallels between his work.
Have you read some Gladwell stuff?
I have.
Obviously.
I've read Outliers, and I think I've read The Tipping Point, but I can't remember. So it was a long time ago. I've definitely read Outliers though. I really liked it.
Didn't imprint on you? Tipping Point or?
Well, obviously not if I can't remember it. But
yeah,
it's in there somewhere.
That was a rhetorical question, mate.
Yeah. But Outliers I really enjoyed. But I kind of found some of his maybe concepts haven't held up as well as others, probably didn't. I kind of lost a bit of love for him, but then I saw him on the Joe Rogan podcast and remembered how good he was. So I'm back in his camp.
He mended the wounds.
He did. So well worth a look. But I said, yeah, it's quite similar to the way Allen writes, actually, his books.
Yeah, I haven't actually read Outliers yet, but I'm definitely going to jump into it at some point.
We should do it on the podcast. I'd love to reread it. So
it's a worthy candidate. So the other thing I really like about this book is he's trying to dispel, to some degree, the idea of the creative genius. It seems to be the general premise of the entire book. And so he's trying to rebrand creativity as being someone who's just simply born with it. Yeah. He or she was born with it. To more of a what is known as the inverted U-shaped relationship between familiarity and preference, or as he simplified, and probably from his marketing back pocket, called the creative curve. And
so what is the creative curve?
Yeah. And so there was a couple of breadcrumbs in that, in the psychology definition, which I read out. But basically it is literally the relationship between human taste and preference. And so basically think of like an x-axis, the horizontal axis as being the spectrum of human taste. And then think about preference as being how preferential it is by people. And so you can just think about like a bell-shaped curve sitting on that. So obviously in the center somewhere, which is, not at either end of the spectrum in terms of familiarity, in terms of taste, that's where you've got the most preference. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Because it's the graph's the highest at that point.
Yeah. And then so it tails off at both ends, either side of that, much like a bell. That's why it's called the bell curve. Fun fact.
Thank you.
And so
informative and fun.
Yeah. You just got to love a practical name, don't you? We need a name for this new concept we've come up with today. Well, it looks like a bell. Let's call it the bell curve.
Yeah. I think you invented it, right? Yeah. No one else would have thought of that.
So the idea is that, we like novelty, and the horizontal axis, like the human taste, where that kind of sits, where the spectrum sits there, or certainly where the center point is sitting, certainly shifts over time. And so it's a very dynamic, moving graph. And what it's also premised on is
a ringing bell.
Do we like that or we don't like that?
Said the bell might be ringing. It's moving. See what I did there?
Thanks for the elaboration, Lockie.
Sorry, I'm just derailing you here. You're in the middle of something. So,
well, okay. So here we go. So let's go with that. So the bell is struck. The little ball hanging in the center hits the side, and it's hit. It's struck a chord or something. So we could consider that as maybe something novel has struck a chord with the community, and we consider that maybe a breakthrough technology or something, or a new thing. But the fact is, it's still within the bell. It's still contained within the bell, and the point of this is that there's not much new. There's not many new things getting around. Everything's been done, and it's just about how we can resurface things, or how we can relook at things in slightly different ways. There's the common quote, which is, there are no new ideas. If you kind of look far and wide enough and back further enough, you probably won't find much new. So essentially what he's getting at is there's a balance between novelty and familiarity.
Yeah, it seems to be that he's kind of talking about this tension between, we want things that are familiar to us because they're kind of safe and they're a known quantity, but we also like the new because it's exciting. And the most successful creative ideas flirt the boundary of those two perfectly, where it's just new enough, but it's not so new that it's a completely crazy thing that we've never seen before. But it's new enough that we understand it, but it's exciting.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot. There's this sweet harmony that's formed between what's the current paradigm, and then what's just outside of that, that's still within the taste zone of enough people to get behind you. So example was that a few examples that he laid out in the book were Harry Potter, which is just the typical orphan rising story, the orphan breaking out of their original life. The iPhone was just the iPod plus a phone. And Star Wars which is a Western set in space. So he's really trying to make a point here, and all those to me resonate. But you look at fashion as well, mate. You know, and music and taste and all those type of things. They very much fit in that space.
Yeah, it's that kind of, when you see that some of the really avant-garde fashion shows, you're like, what the hell's this? You know, like it's so out there you can't grab it. But then you see the stuff that they're actually releasing, and it's just that little bit different. And then those things, once everyone gets used to them, they get fatigued, and then the creative souls are at the new forefront, and they're at the new edge and releasing things that are just outside of the new normal.
Yeah, you look at what we're probably finding, mate, is the fashion catwalks, you know, in Paris or whatever, you know, going back to, let's say, the 2000s or something, you know, though the clothing ranges that were being presented then probably came out in 2005 or something like that, you know? Whereas what I think we're seeing now is that space between being shown at a fashion Paris, you know, showcase to when they're actually out in the big mainstream stores is certainly getting tighter. Things seem to be moving faster.
It seems that way. I mean, there's kind of famous stories about the clothing brand Zara that they see what's on the fashion, you know, field, and then they, you know, actually make it within like 3 days and release things that are just right on that cutting edge.
Yeah, but it's not
an army of sewers and stuff like that.
But it's not just that, mate. They've got those sewers, and the reason that it takes 3 days to release it is because it takes 3 days for the ship that they're all on to sail from, you know, wherever it is in Spain to whatever country they're trying to get to. So they're literally
insane. That is great. Like, that's taking it to the next level, isn't it? You've got the whole crew on the ship making the clothes that you're going to sell when you reach port.
Yeah, it's literally what they've done is they've literally like decreased the time between, you know, innovation or, you know, ideas for the innovation. And then the only thing that's constraining them is how fast the ship can go almost to when they can actually release in store. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So what other examples?
He talks a lot about, so we mentioned the sweet spot, you know, that's that safe space, if you will. It's certainly not a safe space, by the way, but it's a safe space in terms of you've got potential to actually make something that's a little bit novel here and to strike a chord. And so what he found was certainly looking at, say, the Beatles, for example, is there was a massive study done in the field of empirical musicology, and that's a field of study behind the maths in music, and certainly something that I can't grasp. And basically the idea behind the study was to investigate what was going on in Beatles music. What were they doing? And what this professor found was that they were basically just taking a template, like the current existing template, and then just adding different features. And remember, this is all in kind of maths and quantitative analysis, and adding features to their music. And so we know from like the Beatles, you know, their time horizon, that they started out in very much mainstream pop. And then they evolved from there, you know, adding in these little bits and pieces. Like they had their big trip to India, and they, you know, discovered some of the Indian, you know, instruments that were on offer, and they started bringing some of those back in. I'm trying to remember what the first one was. It like Sergeant Pepper or something? It was one of the first songs to have that kind of that. You know the instrument I'm talking about?
The sitar you're talking about.
Yeah, the sitar. That's it. I knew you'd know it, Lockie.
The 12 strings or whatever. It's a weird looking thing. Sounds pretty cool.
Sounds cool though.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely pushed the edges. They didn't sit still.
Yeah. And they were continually reinventing. You know, they were continually, once they'd kind of found the safe space, they would, you know, kind of milk it a little bit or sit there for a little while, enough to become familiar with them just for themselves, and then they'll move on to the next one. And by that time, it was almost like the mainstream had kind of caught up to that old safe space, and they kept iterating on.
There's kind of like something he talks about is actually, let's say, you can actually kind of feel this effect when you think about how you feel when you hear a new song. It's like you hear a new song or your favorite band releases a new album. You listen to through the first time, you're like, oh, geez, it doesn't feel that good. You know, is this any good? Oh, I'll give it another crack. And on the third, you listen, you're like, hell yeah, I'm getting this. You know, I understand it. And you've hit in that sweet spot of the familiarity. And then you keep listening. And after a while, you kind of get over it. And then it's moving through those phases.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. Like the ones for me, I find that the songs that kind of take a few listens to really, you know, get sunk in, but you kind of feel something from the first listen, I think, is important. Because the ones that you like need to force yourself to sit down to, you know, for 4 or 5 listens, and, you know, even just then you're starting to like, yeah, okay, I get it. You know, it's kind of growing on me now. And I feel like those ones have a shorter time span with me. Maybe. But what I'm really interested in is the songs that don't get old.
That's kind of what I was just thinking. I don't understand that, but it's got to do with, you can't, if you overcook it, you get sick of anything probably. But there's some songs that just seem to stick with you, aren't there, that you don't really get sick of.
Yeah,
stand the test of time.
You just listen to them again and again and again, and they, for whatever reason, they're just enjoyable. And maybe it has to do with, I was going to say, maybe it has to do with like memories that you have associated with those particular songs.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of it's got to be context as part of it, but I have no clue why certain songs have that effect. But
there's a particular song by Todd Terje. It's called DeLorean Dynamite. And for those that don't know Todd Terje, check him out. Terje. Hope I've spelled that right. Groovy track, but I suspect that I've just had great times with friends and different things listening to that song. Because I don't know whether everyone would be into that.
Well, I've never heard of this person, so I'll listen to it and I'll let you know if I've got the same vibes.
All right. You got to give it at least 3 listens though, mate.
Okay. I'll give it, I'll even give you 5. I'll listen to it 5 times.
Jeez,
the only knock I've got on this is that it feels a little contrived, like you try to hack the creative process a little.
Yeah.
You know, like, and he talks a lot about pop music, that it's formulaic and that's like how that succeeds. Yeah, but it's hollow, a lot of that, and a lot of it doesn't last. So to me, I understand what he's saying, but I also, you don't want to take the creativity out of creativity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I think we'll probably get to this a little bit later on, mate. But I think what happens is, as people, you know, become more genius in their craft, as they gradually become more masterful of what they're doing, if they have a genuine curiosity and interest in what they are doing, they tend to just explore a little bit, and they're exploring on a completely different level to everyone else, which is, case in point, the Beatles, or case in point, Paul McCartney, which he actually talks about as well, specifically in the book. And I think it's that exploration then that really kind of that the people who are perceiving it, the public or the fans, the audience, they're the ones that then go, wow, this is incredible. This is creative genius. Whereas for the creator, they're just exploring. They're just down in the depths that other people can't see.
Mm.
So
that's quite astute.
I did mention.
I think that, and this is where the 4 laws of creativity that he talks about probably resonated most with me, as opposed to the curve itself.
Yeah. I did want to just quickly touch on getting into that we did mention like the lack of creative genius, and that he's trying to emphasize that creative genius isn't just because people are genius. Paul McCartney was known to have dreamt up yesterday, just one night dreamt it up. Whereas what actually happened is there was a couple of notes that he remembers waking up one day, and then he couldn't get these notes out of his head, and he ended up I think he has 6 notes, and then he ended up spending 20 months doing nothing but playing and toying with those six notes, or this melody of 6 notes. Even including when the rest of the Beatles were touring, and he wouldn't even go on tours, and he would just focus on these 6 notes. And the lyrics weren't something that came into the song until right at the very end. So he basically spent 20 months solely focused on tweaking these 6 notes that he'd dreamt up.
God, must have driven him nuts.
Yeah, but that's there's something in that gives you an indication. And
that launches us into the 4 laws, I reckon.
Spot on. Nice little segue.
Yeah, you've led me in. So here's where he talks about, I guess, these 4 laws of creativity. And he says, the methods these creators have learned to master the creative curve are what I call the laws of the creative curve, or the laws of creativity. In the course of the book, I will outline and explain the 4 laws, and they are the law of consumption, the law of imitation, the law of creative communities, and the law of iterations. And so each of those are basically the themes that he saw across all the different people that he interviewed and looked into. And they're kind of simple, but they make a lot of sense when you go through them. And it's quite an eye-opening, simple kind of way to look at the process of creativity in many ways.
Mm. So tell us about them, Lockie, and then I've got a few questions for you.
Quiz at the end, is it?
Yeah, it's a post-section quiz that you don't know about.
Awesome. All right,
I'm sure I'll forget the questions throughout the section.
Should I take notes? So law 1, consumption. So this is where he talks about all the artists that are really successful are also kind of fans. They're fans of what they do. So if they're musicians, they listen to heaps of music across broad amount of genres and are obsessed by different artists, and have massive record collections and spend all their time listening to music. Or if you're a writer, you read, And so the law of consumption is about consuming so much work that you start to get a feel for what is on the edge of that curve and where the edge is. and what areas other artists are exploring as well. And so basically he sort of means by that, be a fan, and submerse yourself in the world. And as a rule, he says that you should spend 25% of your time consuming creative pieces from others out of your available time budget.
Yeah, which works out to be like, 3 to 4 hours per day, really. Something of that.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of hours.
Think of it like that. Yeah.
Do you think you spend, mate, 3 to 4 hours on any venture or any creative venture in a particular day, or any one field?
Well, I guess I have a job, so I'd do that.
But are you consuming though? So I think there's one thing about yes, having a job, but if you're doing emails, or if you're doing processes and things that you've done in the past, or winning jobs, or whatever it happens to be, that's different from actually reading the cutting edge, or trying to understand and see what others are doing in the space.
Yeah, I would say most people don't do that, and I probably don't either. I do a lot of reading about business and listening to podcasts about it, and kind of immersing myself that way in those sort of things. So I would say I do it, but certainly not 20% of my time is spent doing that, not even close. But I am a voracious reader of like those kind of nonfiction books, as we know from this podcast. So I do a bit, but not as much as I reckon he recommends.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
It's a tough ask, mate. Well, I don't know. Like, I think when you maybe add up the reading throughout the week, particularly, again, for this podcast, I think that you probably do get to that, because some, particularly on some weekends and things, you do more than that, just because you need to play catch up. But there's certainly days that you don't do anything because you just buggered at the end of the day, or whatever's going on. So, but he brings up a really good example in the book of Ted Sarandos, and he speaks about how when he was his upbringing was in a very kind of disjointed household, a very it was a bit of a rough upbringing. There was always domestic. I'm not sure of domestic violence, but there was always disputes and things in the house. And so movies and television became the ultimate escape for him from his own chaotic household. What ended up happening is that became a safe space. There was a video store that opened up near his house. He ended up getting a job there, part-time job there, because he was in there so much and talking to the owner so much. He ended up he made a commitment to himself that he was going to watch every single movie in the store and just think about it. So there's a weird dedication here, but it's almost like this emotional bind for him. And so what ends up happening is, he ends up progressing beyond that video store, running the video store. And then, shortly after, there's a few other things in between, but shortly after, he is then asked to come on as the content manager or head of content for, you guessed it, Netflix. So this is the guy that's making all the content decisions in Netflix. So I'd suggest he's done pretty damn well.
It's super interesting because Quentin Tarantino worked in a video store as well. And you can see his knowledge of films just littered throughout his movies. So there's a theme there.
Oh, definitely, mate. Well, the funny thing is with Ted, he actually, when he was obviously still working at the movie store, he was like a recommendation machine for all of his friends and anyone that came up and asked him. And he says it's quite interesting how his life, what he does hasn't changed, except now that instead of recommending it to people directly. He's actually just helping the developers build out technology to help with recommendations towards people.
That's so cool. Yeah,
that's leverage.
Super interesting. Yeah, damn right. So law 2, imitation. So this is where he kind of says that most artists will imitate their peers or the people that have gone before them and learn kind of the more mainstream style of what they're doing before they push to the edge. And pretty much without exception, I reckon there's always an exception, but most artists or creators have done this. There's so many examples of this. It shocked me when that's a clickbait title, but it shocked me how true this was. And I kind of really tweaked to it when I think I've talked about going to the Van Gogh Museum before in the podcast in Amsterdam. And when I went there, his early drawings are just like these beautiful sketches that are just perfectly, technical drawings with no kind of flair. And then it kind of stuck with me as like that. I was like, that doesn't really fit the narrative. And then the more you read about different people, the more this is the case, Like take something like jazz, where one of the most creative types of music, you could argue, certainly the most free-flowing. And the most creative artists like John Coltrane and Miles Davis and these kind of guys, they all played in bands before they broke out in their own for years and years and years to actually learn that kind of the core, what was the mainstream or the core of the functionality. And then you look at, say, Picasso's paintings. If you Google his early stuff, it's these perfect drawings, whitely, like it's just, with almost without exception, you can find that all these people who do the abstract sort of art all know how to paint traditionally too.
Yeah, they've mastered the craft, and then I think maybe, as we mentioned earlier, like they start to like explore these outer reaches because they get curious. They're like, I've pushed this to the limit, and then you might see them, start to shift the way they paint from being this, perfectly, perfect and refined way to then like starting to bring in weird or slightly off elements. And then, this is where you see Picasso completely shifting gears from like realistic painting into, what he's known for. It's
full on. Really cool, really cool. So, and again, that's kind of helping you find the edge of, you need to know the center before you can find the edge, I think is kind of the theme of that. The third one is the law of creative communities, which is about getting certain types of people around you that will help you be in an environment that will push you creatively and help you get your stuff out there. And it, again, the environment selection piece is just so, the environment that you're in just comes up again and again in all these books we read. It's so prevalent and so important. And it's something that is very difficult to change because you don't necessarily actively want to because of your human nature. The environment that you put yourself in is just by nothing else but just putting yourself in that environment can lead to completely different outcomes for you.
Yeah. I think it takes some serious guts, mate, to sometimes shift what that environment is,
And sometimes people just don't have the option, when you think about
certainly.
like the cycles of poverty and things like that you see.
Yeah. Yeah. Like systemic cycles of that, which is, really, really bad. And for the fortunate that maybe aren't in some of those situations, even then it can be really tough to shift those crowds, because it means you're kind of breaking up relationships with potentially friends or potentially family in some situations. It's crazy.
Yeah. So he talks about 4 types of sort of people in your community that you should seek out. And one of them is a master teacher. So someone who can show you the way. And that's kind of pretty obvious. It's kind of a mentor type. But it's funny how often we feel like we don't need teachers or coaches. It's just not true. The second one is what he calls a conflicting collaborator. So this is someone who is creating as well, but is different to you, and just the right amount of different to kind of maybe even frustrate you, but to push you, and that you can kind of bounce off. And you kind of know that tension when you find it with someone, that they kind of pull you in a direction that you're perhaps not naturally going, or push you competitively to do better,
I think something that's underrated or maybe not called out as much there, mate, is in the situation of having that kind of master mentorship, model. What it also requires is you as the person who's being mentored shows up as being like an apprentice. And then this is where you come back to the apprenticeship model, but it's about like actually be like kind of willing to part with, your strong held beliefs in something or the way you think it should be, particularly like there's no age at which you can't not have a mentor. And so you might have been doing, you might think that you've really, nailed project management. We've been doing it for 30 years or something like that, right? To take a related example. And then you just discover this person who is known as the master of this thing. And he says to do it a completely different way. And I'm thinking here probably actually when agile project management first came in place of what waterfall was, and which is, thought of as being just revolutionary when I'm sure when it did, but it's not to say that there isn't a better way.
Yeah, and you can learn from anyone if you're not too proud.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And I think the thing we haven't said, mate, is you are the 5 people you hang around with the most.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So the third one is a modern muse, and it's something or someone to inspire you. And a lot of artists relate to this concept. It's still quite abstract for me, but it's out there of something that, you can grab onto that inspires you to do your work. The fourth and final is the promoter, which is interesting too. And this is kind of where it gets pragmatic, is that you need a cheerleader who's prominent in the industry that you're trying to break into, that will help promote your work and be your cheerleader who's got some clout that can help push your work into the world. Maybe it's not as necessary now because of social media and these kind of technological leverage that you can get, a la Naval, but it still is very important, I think.
Well, I think, mate, if you have a promoter, still, you're still taking advantage of social, that social media technology leverage, but it's not one person that's leveraging; it's 2 people that are leveraging potentially. or you don't need to be spending your time trying to leverage it, because it can be quite a time consuming thing still.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, do you think many people have promoters? Like I certainly don't. Like, as in, I can't think directly of someone as being a promoter of stuff. You know what I mean?
I think you would have had one when you were working back at KPMG or one of those places that you just probably didn't realise that was the relationship you had with them at the time.
That's interesting.
I mean? They weren't a mentor, but they were willing to throw your hat in the ring. Oh, Ryan would be good in this, or, you know. There would have been, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know. And I tend to agree with that. I think that from that perspective, definitely.
But probably not for your creative works, because perhaps you haven't yet pursued it in the way that, you know.
I just likened it, yeah, and yeah, it didn't mean that to sound like a claw out or anything, but it was like I just didn't see that as being a very prevalent thing in general. I think a lot of people have kind of mentors, but I liken the promoter role as being something the equivalent of maybe what Peggy Guggenheim was for Jackson Pollock. And essentially, you know, her just really pushing out his artwork into the world and, you know, making big change in terms of the exposure that work would have had, or the buy-in that it would have had.
I think that's spot on. And I think it's like, how do you translate that to something that you're doing? I mean, I don't think we have that for this podcast. I don't think we've sought that out yet, and we probably should.
Any takers? No. So the
taking applications.
Yeah, but I think I think in that case, mate, Pollock was really at like a cutting edge, right? He was probably just too far outside of the curve to be noticed by, you know, maybe people with a little bit more interest in art. So Peggy was almost like this person bridging the gap between the art fans and where he was sitting, if that makes sense.
Well, the promoter can play like a legitimizing role too.
Yeah.
Because it kind of comes down to like, art's so subjective that that Banksy movie, Exit Through the Gift Shop's a great example of this kind of theme of, you know, what is it? What makes it great? You know, is it the art itself as like something that's hanging in the wall that everyone walks up to and goes, damn, that's good? Or is it the hype around it? Or, you know, it's all mixed in somewhere in this kind of soup that makes things great or not great. Like if I saw a Picasso without the cultural,
acceptance of it,
indoctrination I'd had, or, you know, not having been in that time or perhaps seen in that world, I'd think I wouldn't even walk. I'd walk past at a garage sale, you know. I don't know anything about art, but someone's told me that's a great painting. So I'm like, oh, that's wonderful, you know.
I think there's probably two things in that, right? I think it gets down to that age-old question of taste and who says that anyone's taste is better than anyone else's taste. I think what you mentioned before about a lot of these artists, they will master what they're doing and then they'll kind of take a couple of steps back and then start to explore other realms. And it might look like, you know, Picasso's gone from painting what looks like a photograph into something that's, you're like, what? You know, maybe a kid could have drawn this at a high school or, you know, primary school type thing, you know, in the paint class. Like, and that's where you hear those type of comments.
I kind of feel like art, like painting, for example, has a lot of context in the time it was painted, much like a song. But it's a bit harder to see that, when you're looking at it.
Yeah, but I think what I probably maybe was getting at after that was Picasso into the paintings, which might be seen by some as being, a finger painting or something from primary school, was that he's actually taken all the mastery from the abilities that he has from being able to paint like a photograph into that to refine out the idea he's trying to portray. And it's almost like you can tell to some degree, even without any understanding, the differences there or the nuances there. Even between a good song and maybe in a bad song. But then again, it's just taste. So I don't really know.
I don't know. It's got to do with a critical mass of people too, right?
Yeah.
So anyhow, law 4 is the law of iteration.
I like that you're keeping it moving, mate. Well done.
Thank you. That was a good rabbit hole, but it could have gone for another 20 minutes if we weren't careful. So law 4 iteration is about just the kind of Stephen Pressfield war of art. Show up, do it again, do it again, do it again, try. Then refine. And he kind of talks about listening to your audience and listening to yourself and getting that feedback and just be out in the arena and kind of knowing that you're not the art that you're creating, but, you kind of need to iterate on it. And it's interesting to what degree you should listen to your audience. I don't know. There's probably a bit of conjecture about what the right amount is, but it's certainly about getting that feedback loop going, even if it's only with yourself.
I heard an interview the other day with Kevin Hart, and he was describing the comedian Kevin Hart, describing the process that he goes through in terms of developing some of his comedy. Now, whether your taste is to Kevin Hart or not, we're going to leave in the past conversation. But regardless, he's doing pretty well as a comedian. So we can all, we can all assume that. And his process, mate, he will start developing his content across a number of months for, his big shows, like he's on Netflix and, some of the big platforms around the world. And then he will start performing shows for almost like a year, but he'll be performing shows at like just little local, pubs or little local things, and you'll just be doing circuits around different crowds and different types of things and getting a feel for the show. He'll be chopping and changing the script, chopping and changing material. And only once he feels comfortable, which typically takes him about 12 months of doing this cycle, will he then take it out onto, the road and start doing, the road show for the comedy. And then he does that for 6 to 12 months. And might then at the end of that go, okay, now let's consider, in the last month or two, or whatever it is of the actual roadshow, let's consider actually maybe filming this and then getting it out to then for a production or for Netflix again or for YouTube or whatever it is. It's incredible.
So much behind it, so much tweaking and practicing and this word here, this timing there,
And after that 2 years of, that material, then it all goes in the bin and he starts again.
Daunting. I guess that's what makes him one of the best, right?
Yeah. Well, good little segue, mate, into the 10,000 hour rule.
Okay, so this was my favourite bit of this book, and it was really about, well, I guess he kind of says that the 10,000 hour rule is really about purposeful practice. It's not just about spending 10,000 hours doing something. So he says non-purposeful practice, which is practicing things you already know how to do, just reinforces the mental processes that are already established. Purposeful practice allows the student to gain a new mental method and thereby improve their ability. And he interviewed the guy who actually came up with the 10,000 hour rule. And this kind of got parallels to range in many ways, in terms of the way that he talks about the 10,000 hour rule in that book too. But I suppose this book's really talking about narrow creative techniques rather than range is talking about more broad generalist learning to live in a chaotic world. But what was so awesome about this section of the book was he talked about this guy called Jonathan Hardesty. And I strongly encourage everyone who listens to this to Google this guy. So this guy started by basically drawing. He said, I want to become an artist. And so what he did was he just started drawing something once a day, started drawing and then painting. And he took a picture and put it up on the internet of everything he did. And he had the tenacity to practice every day, or, let's call it every day, and do these drawings. And you can literally see his improvement over many years. And so he's in the book, Allen says, without knowing it, Jonathan Hardesty had stumbled into becoming one of the few documented public examples of someone engaging in extensive purposeful practice in an atelier, which is like a French painting school, which he ended up going to after he kind of reached the end of teaching himself how to paint. He spent roughly 6,000 hours of purposeful practice over a 4-year period. Overall, Hardesty estimates that between his formal and informal training, he's put in well over 25 hours of purposeful practice.
25,000 hours.
25,000 hours. Yeah, a few more than what I said. So, I mean, you just look at these drawings. It is ridiculous where he went from and to.
Just hang on. So let's say the average work, just a proper work day is like 8 hours or something. 25,000 hours divided by 8. That's 3,125 days.
That's insane.
Like that's almost 9 years if you're doing 8 hours a day.
Oh, I think it was longer. It was like 10. It was over 10 years he did this.
Yeah, but I mean, there's people that probably do that in less time too, and they're probably spending 12 hours a day, just totally consumed.
So, but his improvement is, I can't believe it. Cannot believe how good he is now compared to what he was drawing. Everything can be learnt.
Yeah, I was going to say when he started, mate. Those if you want to look it up, look up Jonathan Hardesty time lapse video or something like that. There's a video that someone's put together of all of his art, and so the pictures that he started out with were probably the equivalent to my drawing, which is probably the equivalent to anyone in year 9 at school. Maybe a little bit younger, and then the progression to what he was doing, which is basically became, almost photo-like painting, which evolved from what he was doing in just grey line, and black drawings. It's remarkable.
Insane.
What I really loved was how he actually flowed from that initial point to then becoming, a master to some degree, or very, very good, let's say very good. And then he actually simplified his work. So once he'd worked out how to almost paint photorealistically, he'd actually started simplifying, and he started doing, you see all these pictures where it's just like single lines and single flows of for a face or something. And that's when you go, yeah, I think he's worked out what's going on now. It
kind of goes to the point of the law too, doesn't it? So I just had a few thoughts around this when you said, so just to preface it, it's kind of a closed system doing these paintings, you know, to kind of talk to, you know, the generalist versus specialist. This is a very specialist thing. So he's learnt this, he's trying to learn a specific skill. But he completed regular practice with iteration, which I relate to Giro and range to some extent. He was consistent and painted for himself, the war of art. He was brave in how he put himself out there. He dared greatly. And he got a teacher when he needed it, which relates to all those books.
Yeah.
Really cool. Really cool.
It connects a lot of nodes in, for sure, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And this whole 10,000 hour rule didn't just, you know, come from nowhere. There was actually a study that associated this, but the 10,000 hours was actually like an average, and it was an average as a result of something which was likened to purposeful practice. All right. So what you need to bear in mind is we mentioned 25,000 hours was what Jonathan had practiced in terms of his drawing and painting. But 25,000 hours is also something that's kind of guessed around for becoming a piano, becoming world class in piano. So if you want to spend the 8 hours a day for 10 years or whatever it is, then you can become a piano master. So, but you just need to realize that that's in front of you. And so you probably need to really love it. Versus if you want to go into, competitive digit memorization, you might be doing something closer to 500 hours of purposeful practice, because there's not many people that are actually doing it.
Depends which pond you're swimming in.
There's probably not the same amount of prestige in both of those.
Yeah. So I think that was the thing I most remembered about this book, is that example. It just blew my mind so much when I physically saw what he'd done. So.
Yeah. Just, mate, pulling out one more example. I have to touch on Mozart, because he obsessed over Mozart in writing this book. And he called Mozart's upbringing like helicopter parenting, because a lot of people regard, I think there's a movie called Amadeus or something. I think it's Amadeus. I'm not sure if it's on Netflix or anything, but he is portrayed in that as performing for like royalty at the age of 3. But little do we actually know that when you actually delve into the biographies of Mozart, it was nothing like that. He had the best musicians in Europe teaching him, because he was in a very wealthy family from the age of 3, and he was forced to practice 3 hours per day, 7 days a week. He's always regarded as writing his first concerto or first symphony or something at the age of like 7, which isn't true either. He wrote his first original piece of music at the age of 17. So that's 14 years later of, I'm sure that practice actually increased from 3 hours a day, learning from the best musicians in the entire continent. And then he released that.
A lot of myth around this guy. Yeah.
Yeah. We all like a short success or a genius story.
Are we trying to trick ourselves into either thinking it's not possible for us, or that we don't have to do the work, or what?
Do you think it's like do you think it comes to that space of like, it's like an excuse, maybe? It can become an excuse to go, well, I wasn't born a creative genius. I can't do this. It's not, I'm never going to be a Mozart or whatever it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I know everyone loves to, natural ability is very kind of intoxicating to like, you see someone who's great at sport or something, you're like, that's so cool. They're just exceptional. And there's something attractive about that. So you don't want to see how the sausage is made necessarily.
Yeah. The sport might be a slightly different space because of like physical attributes. Like me, I'm never going to be a great basketballer simply because I'm not tall enough. You could never compete.
That's true, but you could get really bloody good at basketball.
Yes.
You could get exceptional. You may never be the best in the world, but
you'll never be an MJ.
You'll never dunk. You might be able to dunk one day.
I think you could. So, I think you've recently committed to that you were going to dunk, didn't you, mate? I think you made a commitment to me that you promised that you would get to the point of being able to dunk one day.
I would love to, but I think it's physically impossible for me to dunk a basketball.
I think we clarified that you were 5'11". So if anyone out there knows of anyone that's 5'11" or shorter that's dunked a ball, please let us know.
Now we're just going to get video clips of Muggsy Bogues just flying in here. I don't want to see him. Makes me jealous.
So,
have we got time for one more discussion point?
Yeah. So I think the whole point of where we're probably getting to in this is we probably like a creative genius because we think a creative genius is kind of getting those sparks, those aha moments as they're known, those real deep insights, and they almost seem ungraspable. But I think what is most fascinating and most enjoyable for me out of it is those aha moments. Anyone can access them. Anyone can potentially gain access to them. You just need to be doing a few things, and that's where Gannett actually talks about the laws, for example, to get there. But I thought it was nice for us to maybe have a think about just some of the ways that you can get a few more of these aha moments and talk about what they are. So the aha moments is the reason that they are, seen as being this like moment of insight or moment of being struck with genius is simply because of a physiological reason and how our brains work. And it's basically like we're not really conscious of the right hemisphere in our brain. And but it's still always doing things. It's still, constantly processing. We're just not conscious of it. Whereas left hemisphere is what we can, associate with being the like more logical, more kind of conscious space where we think of things, where we're actually physically thinking ourselves. And what actually happens is both of these hemispheres, like, so the right-hand side is known as the creative side, the left-hand side is known as like the more like process-orientated side. I'm going to make a debacle of this. So basically what happens is at some point in time, this subconscious side works out some answer or works out a solution to something that we might have been scrambling around with on the left-hand side. We may not have even been scrambling around with on the left-hand side. And then all of a sudden, in this spark of inspiration, it kind of blasts across into our conscious sphere, some information, some data to say, hey, here's an idea. And this is why you get all these light bulb moments when you're maybe in the shower, because you've quietened down enough the left brain enough that you can actually hear what's going on in the right-hand side of the brain.
So you let them bubble up. So how do we get more of these?
Well, I think looking at the laws that he lays out in the book, like, you need to consume things. You need to have things. Things need to like go in consciously, and then they need to be like processed subconsciously. And if you don't get don't consume the things that are related to what you want to do, then there's not going to be those things bumbling around in that, that right hemisphere.
Yeah.
So I think all those rules
mental network.
Yeah, all the rules are critical. A lot of these like creative geniuses or the people we regard as creative geniuses, their entire lives revolved around this stuff. So
yeah,
totally immersed and emotionally attached too.
It's like bamboo, it grows for years underground, then bang, comes out.
And then just doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I think we hit on purposeful practice. That's obvious. But one that did strike me was he speaks about the gamma band, and so there's like there's alpha, beta, and gamma waves, I think, floating around in your brain.
Tell me more about it, Mr. Neuroscientist.
I don't know anything about any of them, so don't ask me. All I know is, right, that
this is payback for the quiz you gave me earlier in the episode. Now I'm going to quiz you on this.
So I believe the gamma band, all that I know is, he says in the book that the gamma band was associated with the flashes of genius. They did a study on the participants, various participants doing creative things, and in monitoring their brains, there was like this definite spike in gamma wave activity at the point at which they had a spark of inspiration.
That's a good explanation. I'm impressed. Now,
yeah, but I didn't actually explain what the gamma waves are. I've got no idea.
Now tell me about the Tex Winters triangle offense.
That's a reference to MJ's episode, I'm taking.
Episode 12. Get back there if you. It's a bit of a callback, but
yeah, that's great. Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. So, the gamma waves, whatever they are, these elusive things they are. I do know that there are certain things that are associated with, that have also been studied to increase those gamma waves. And surprise, surprise, they are things that we often hear as being very good for us. So meditation is an example.
That's cool.
I know long-term meditators their brains have been scanned time and time again, and the amount of gamma wave activity that's going on inside their minds is significantly more than people who don't meditate. So if there's ever a time to sit in silence, there's one. Learning a language, showing love and compassion, or having a feeling of love and compassion, and also coming up with ideas. And all these things have been kind of correlated with increasing gamma wave activity. So I'm not sure on all the science and how much correlation is behind each of them, but I certainly know that meditation has been studied endlessly.
Really cool. And what will you do differently because of this book, Ryan? I think because we clearly placed a big emphasis throughout the entire episode on doing, showing up, doing the work, which means you actually need to enjoy it to some degree. Like you need to, absolutely, yeah.
You need to be aligned with it. It can't be something that you just grossly disgusts you. It needs to be
just
something
grind out for no reason. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. It's a really good point.
So I think that was an important takeaway for me, was continually seeking towards the most aligned work, because I don't think you have a spark of insight about what it is that is your is the creative calling or is the purposeful calling? But I think you can iterate your way there. I think you can gradually step your way there over time. And so I think being attuned to that is important, because being in something that you enjoy doing allows a creative flow to happen. So the other one is consumption, mate. I'm just going to try and focus on that consumption a little bit more and actually focusing on consumption that's relevant.
That's really cool. I think for me, it's intentional practice and making sure it's being done at a regular basis for whatever I'm trying to focus on. And then I think it's to immerse myself in the medium, of whatever I'm doing more intentionally. Maybe I'll try and find a promoter too.
Hey, have you got any candidates, mate?
I need to think about it. It's a weird concept.
It is a weird concept. But I think what you hit on before, I was going to say what you hit on before was quite interesting. I hadn't actually thought of that. The fact that we may already have, to some degree, promoters.
Yeah,
no?
You're probably right. But I'd like to kind of define it a bit more. So,
yeah. Oh, that's great, mate.
That's a wrap.
That is a wrap.
Good. That's good fun. That's a great book, and it's really fun to talk about. So
we'll call it there for this week.
See you next time.
See you, mate.